So we're here at IBC at Aputure stand in Amsterdam. I'm here with Brendan to talk about Aputure new releases and upcoming projects. Nice to meet you, Brendan.
Nice to meet you.
Tell me all about the new lights. You know, I've seen a couple of new fixtures, the big Electro, plus we got a full range of light storms and everything in here. Just give us a brief rundown what's going on at your booth and what to expect in the future since we at IBC and it's such a future-focused show.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'll focus on, if we're focusing on the future, let's focus on the Electro Storm lights because they are the future of what Aputure is meant to be in the high end. You'll notice that the Electro Storm lineup is a separate lineup from the Light Storm lineup, and that's done on purpose because it's meant to indicate a few key things. For one, the Electro Storm lineup is called the Electro Storm lineup because of its electronic Aputure mount. So both the Electro Storm CS15 and the XT26 feature this Aputure mount that is electronic, that has a more robust contact connecting mechanism, as well as contact pins that allow it to communicate data and pass through power. So for something like the F14 Fresnel, it's able to communicate data as to where the position of the Fresnel should be to adjust the beam angle of the Fresnel, as well as be able to transmit the power that allows it to move the piece of glass that allows it to adjust that beam angle. But also that communication goes two ways. I can mount the 20-degree reflector on either of these lights, and basically the light will say, oh, I have a profile for a 20-degree reflector. 20-degree reflector usually adjusts my color temperature by this much, my green magenta by this much. Let me calibrate it back to get it back into the realm of possibility, the realm that I like to work in, so closer to neutral color temperature. So that's what it's able to do with the Aputure mount. Additionally, you have other electronic features like the motorized yoke for both the CS15 and XT26, which gives you pan and tilt control over these lights. So you can throw these up on the Long John Silver, you can throw these up on a crane, and you're going to be able to remotely adjust the pan, tilt, and what the positioning and what it's aiming at. Especially combined with the motorized Fresnel, you basically get motorized control and flexibility, whether you're using Sidus Link, whether you're using the control box itself, or whether you're using DMX, which is going to be more common for the users of these lights in particular. You're going to be able to do a lot with the flexibility that this offers you. And then this is in addition to its robust build quality with an IP65 construction, liquid water cooling. You also have the fact that these are two big fixtures, and with these big fixtures, they're going to be used on big production. So with these high-end gaffers, these high-end cinematographers, these high-end productions, they ask for two major things, and we decided to deliver them. We worked really, really hard on having engineers pour a lot of time into these functions. One, namely being flicker-free functionality. So the PWM operates at a higher frequency, so you're able to get a lot more performance out of the standard dimming mode, so you're going to be able to get to a higher frame rate without flicker. Additionally, you also have a high-speed mode, so that's if you're shooting above 1,000 frames per second. You want to shoot on the Phantom, you want to shoot at 30,000 frames per second. You're going to be able to use our high-speed mode, and high-speed mode basically uses constant current dimming, so you're not using the PWM at all, and you're actually just going to be able to get flicker-free performance for throughout a wide variety of frame rates, pretty much infinitely flicker-free. Now, in addition, it's not just when you're shooting at super bright lights that you really want your light to perform, no matter how powerful these are. You also want these super powerful lights to perform at very, very, very low intensities. So a lot of what people were asking for was a greater performance in low-end dimming. So we poured a lot of time into that, and that is why the cooling mechanisms on these lights are the way they are. With the XT26 and the CS15, the low-end dimming is excellent. When you dim to 0.1%, you're actually getting 0.1% in terms of the intensity. So the lux at 0.1% is basically 0.1% of the lux at 100%.
Okay.
So you're going to get a lot better performance out of these lights throughout the entire range, and that's something that a lot of the high-end gaffers and cinematographers are always asking for, especially with cameras now shooting at super high sensitivities of like 3200 ISO. It's ridiculous what these cameras are able to achieve nowadays, so the lights don't always need to play as powerfully. So the Electro Storms have also all the connectivity you could possibly need, everything from DMX to Lumen Radio to Ethernet, it has the Ethernet switch in it, as well as, of course, Sidus Link, everything within the Aputure ecosystem. But to look at these two lights individually, the two things that are different and unique about each one, the CS15, which stands for Color, Spectrum, and 1500 watts, is a powerhouse of a light fixture that's able to replace most 1800 watt HMIs, in fact some 2.5 kilowatt HMIs as well, because of its functionality where you can dim it, control it via Lumen Radio, but also with that full color control. That full color control is complemented by the dual blue-white light technology that's built into this fixture. So it has stunning spectral performance. It has a D56 SSI of 86 and a tungsten SSI of 89. So it's getting very, very close to very perfect tungsten and very, very close to very perfect daylight. And it's probably one of the best performers in this category of intensity that it's at. And then you look at the XT26, that's a 2600 watt chipset with crossfade, so that's bicolor control. But we call it dynamic white because it also has the addition of green magenta shift. That's what the T stands for, it stands for tint. So this dynamic white 2600 watt light is able to provide you with color temperature flexibility as well as tint flexibility at a crazy high intensity. So with the narrow reflector, you're getting about 80% of the performance of an M40, at least on paper. So you're going to be able to start replacing using some of these super high output HMIs with LEDs that will offer you a lot more flexibility to dim down to those super low intensity levels.
Exactly. That's what I was actually leading into. Do you think that we are the forefront of that technology of LED lighting completely taking over because the fixtures are getting stronger and stronger? Where's the limit? What's the technical limitation now? Is the heat output or how strong we can get these lights, in the future?
I mean, there's two major things that are the limiting factors of LEDs when it comes to replacing HMIs. And that, of course, is one of our goals, is to basically create lights that can replace the HMIs, at least the low-level HMIs on your set, the medium-level HMIs, so that you have all the flexibility and functionality that you need. The two big things scientifically that are limiting LEDs are heat and the size of the chipset. The heat is a big one because it limits the rest of the fixture in terms of the larger the fixture I create, the larger the wattage I create, I need adequate cooling for that COB, for the LED, because it's different than using a point source bulb, an HMI bulb that can just heat up, and as long as you have it dissipate before it touches any of the components inside the rest of the shell, you're going to be okay. For an LED, because it's on a board, you're having to make sure that everything stays at a reasonably cool temperature, albeit a reasonably cool temperature is still something like in the 80 degrees Celsius range. It's still very, very hot. But you need to be able to cool that, and that is the limiting factor for LEDs. Now, in addition, that's the size of the chipset. In order to increase the output of an LED, you basically have to increase the amount of power that it has, because you do reach, at least at the current stage of LED manufacturing we're at, an efficiency limit for LEDs. So as you increase the size of the chipset, you also have to increase the size of your optics and then increase the size of your housing in order to work with that chipset. So you start to run into efficiency limitations when it comes to, I want to create a 10,000 watt LED, a 5,000 watt LED. It's like, if I want a 5,000 watt LED, I need a lens that's significantly larger than if I'm creating a 100 watt LED. It's exponentially larger because I need to basically tell my optics to focus that better. Or you end up with just not as functional or not as optimized focusing ranges. So there's always trade-offs when it comes to the world of LEDs, and the trade-off basically moves down to weight.
Yeah.
So those are the three limiting factors that I would consider are like the first and foremost things that people should consider, which is heat, and then the size of the light, which ultimately, the size of the LED, which ultimately affects the size of the light, and therefore the weight. It always comes down to, I can make you any light you need. Yeah. But how heavy can you take?
Exactly. Tell me, what in terms of power sources, powering these lights, are there any, because the size sure power them, is there any technology, any remote powering options at the moment? Is there any power stations capable of running such a big lights, or do you have anything like this?
Well, yeah, so if you look at the CS15 and the XT26, what's unique about them is, so the CS15 is a very powerful light. I'm from LA, I'm from the US, so what we have to consider is like, can we run this light off of a household circuit? Because in the US, unlike in Europe, we run 110 volts. Exactly. So our amperage limit is quite different, and our wattage limit is quite different. But the CS15 you can still run on in a household circuit, because the max power draw of the CS15 is a little over 2,000 watts. The max power draw of the XT26 is somewhere around that 3,100 watt range, but that's the true max power draw. You're unlikely to really hit that 3,100 watt range unless you have the Fresnel, you have the motorized yoke, and you're trying to get some extra juice out of it, but really unlikely that's going to be the case. So you are going to be able to run both of those lights off of something like the EcoFlow that we have behind us. So the Aputure Delta Pro is going to be a battery fixture that can output 3600 watts continuously, and both of these lights are under 3600 watts. So you would theoretically be able to run these off of something like the Aputure Delta Pro, or run these off of equivalent battery power stations that are able to handle the output of 3600 watts or 3100 watts.
So tell me, how much of Prolich, as people probably know, you acquired Prolich, so how much Prolich technology goes into these lights? Was that the main driving factor behind these new, more professional, if I can call it, fixtures?
Yeah, well, these Electro Storm lights were introduced at Cinegear LA, so earlier this year in June. So that's when these lights were first introduced. So that's before the acquisition of Prolich. And later today, we're going to be talking a little bit more about what that means, what the acquisition means for the future of Aputure. I can say that we haven't turned around products magically fast. It's a new budding relationship, but the teams have already started to talk to each other, and we are already starting to come up with new ideas about what the future may hold. And our vision of the future is a shared vision of how we can accomplish creating the best light possible for our users, and that's something that we're working towards together. So I can tell you that the future looks exciting, but there's no Prolich technology directly in the Electro Storm fixtures at this moment. Yeah.
Tell me this, do you feel like, because you see so many different brands like Geo, starting with gimbals and now producing light fixtures, same with the microphones, stuff like that. Do you feel the pressure of these smaller, other electronic brands branching out into lighting fixtures, or?
It's really interesting to see a bunch of these other brands move into lighting. What I think Aputure stands apart is that Aputure and a lot of the people who work here have a background in filmmaking, have a background in lighting. We have people like Mitch Gross, we have people like Tim Kang, we have people like Ben Dynas, people who come from the world of filmmaking, who come with a lot of expertise in their area of study and their area of interest, and it can speak on behalf of the filmmaker, but also can speak to the filmmaker and make sure that at the end of the day, our products are serving the needs of the filmmaker. Because I think that's whoever may enter the industry, we're open to the competition. We're open to everyone joining and making the product that's right for the end user. Because at the end of the day, if there's a gap, it's because someone didn't make the right product for that right end user. But what we hope to hold is that we know the filmmaker exceptionally well, and that we hope to make products that serve the filmmaker exceptionally well.